Hi, folks. Thanks for joining us. My name is Deb Otis, and I'll be getting us started in just a minute. All right, let's jump in. Thanks everyone for joining us on this call this morning. My name is Deb Otis. I'm the Senior Research Analyst with FairVote, and we have had an exciting election day this past Tuesday and an exciting year overall on the ranked choice voting front. Ranked choice voting is the fastest growing, most bipartisan voting reform in the country. And so today, I want to share a few key takeaways about what we're seeing in this movement. And then I want to introduce some of our great partners who will speak about why their communities have adopted ranked choice voting and how it's going on the ground. So today, I'd like to share with you some top lines on the numbers, who is using RCV now, and who is voting to adopt RCV as well. And then we'll look at a couple of key races where RCV has played a part or could have played a part. And then we'll turn it over to our partners for local looks in some various cities and states. So first up, RCV by the numbers. A record 32 cities successfully used ranked choice voting this election day, this past Tuesday. This was across 7 states: Utah, Delaware, Massachusetts, Maine, Michigan, Minnesota, and New Mexico. And we can, of course, make sure you have that list in writing. 22 of those 32 cities were using ranked choice for the first time and used it successfully. In Utah, 20 cities used RCV as part of a statewide pilot program. Almost all of those were using it for the first time this year. This included Salt Lake City, Sandy, and Lehigh, 3 of the 11 largest cities in the state. In a couple of minutes, our friend Stan with Utah Ranked Choice Voting will speak to that front. And now, in addition to seeing RCV successfully used in all of these cities, we're also seeing voters in more cities vote to adopt it. And so we'll have more implementations coming up soon. We are excited to share that RCV is 5 for 5 in 5 different states for ballot questions this year. Voters in Ann Arbor, Michigan, Westbrook, Maine, and Broomfield, Colorado all voted to adopt ranked choice voting this election day. And that is on top of 2 additional cities who voted in favor earlier this year. That's Austin, Texas, and Burlington, Vermont. One highlight there is in the margins in Ann Arbor and Westbrook were nearly 2-to-1 in favor of ranked choice voting. And Broomfield, Colorado is the first Colorado city to opt in since legislation passed earlier this year was signed by the governor to pave the way for more municipal use in Colorado. And so we're looking forward to seeing even more cases in Colorado in the coming years. Next, I will highlight a couple of elections of note, places that used ranked choice voting or places that could have seen strong impacts if they had used RCV. So we saw RCV used in the primaries of several of this year's highest profile elections. In New York City, they are having their most diverse government ever after parties used ranked choice voting in their primary elections to select their nominees. For the first time in history, they will have a majority female city council. They have elected their second ever Black mayor and a number of other trailblazing outcomes, like the first South Asian American councilor, first Muslim woman councilor, first Black gay woman council member. And so all of these candidates won through ranked choice voting primaries before then securing their victory in the general election this week. Additionally, ranked choice voting showed up in Virginia. Virginia Republican Party swept races for governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general. Those candidates were nominated using ranked choice voting. For the first time, the Republican Party used ranked choice voting at their convention. And the governor's race in particular stands out because it was a competitive field of about 5 competitive candidates that were representing different ideologies within the Republican Party. Glenn Youngkin won after a ranked choice voting election and demonstrated this broad support that he had, and it helped bring the party together. And had less of the infighting and cattiness that can come out of nasty primary fights. And this Republican ticket in Virginia is thought to be their most competitive ticket that was nominated in decades, and then went on to win those seats. Winsome Sears in Virginia will be Virginia's first Black woman lieutenant governor, and Jason Miyares will be its first Latino attorney general. So we're seeing some trailblazing outcomes there as well. We also saw, of course, RCV used in major mayoral races in Minnesota, and we'll be excited to share more findings from Minnesota with our allies shortly. Lastly, I want to briefly touch on a couple of races around the country where ranked choice voting was not used, but could have made a difference. An important one is the Atlanta mayoral election. It looks like that race is going to a runoff. This will be costly to taxpayers, and it means an extended campaign season for voters and for these candidates, where the final two now have to go face off again. And so we, of course, believe that this race could have been done in one single ranked choice voting election without the need to hold a delayed runoff and ask voters to turn out again. We saw a congressional primary in Florida's 20th district to replace former Representative Elsie Hastings, the 20th district. There were 11 candidates in that race. It was a perfect opportunity for ranked choice voting, but instead it was a regular plurality election. Right now, the current leader has 23.8% of the vote. And this is not a strong mandate to lead. This leader is only separated from the second place candidate by 31 votes. This is an extremely close election where most voters did not weigh in between the two finalists. Most voters voted for someone else. Their second and third choices should be taken into account here, but they won't be. We do expect this race to go on to an automatic recount. And still to come, we will be happy to keep folks in the loop. We are still gathering voter data. We'd have voter surveys coming out of Utah and Minnesota and other areas, which we'll be happy to help share findings from. And we'll be continuing to analyze election results as the full data comes in, as all of the ballots become counted and these results get certified. So those are the top lines that we have been seeing so far across the country, but I do want to certainly dive in with our partners here who can talk about the local angles. So if folks have questions, please feel free to type those out and send those along, or we will definitely open it up for folks to ask questions at the end as well. Right now, I would love to turn it over to Stan Lockhart from Utah Ranked Choice Voting. Stan is a former chair of the Utah Republican Party, and he's been a great partner as Utah piloted RCV in so many cities. So Stan, could you tell us a bit about how this experience was, seeing RCV for the first time in so many Utah cities?
Let me just apologize to everyone. I'm on an airplane. It's about ready to take off. And so I just felt really strongly that I wanted to be on this morning. We had a great experience in Utah Tuesday night using ranked choice voting. And we had lots of anecdotes so far, but it appears that voters liked it. Candidates used it to be more civil and more issues oriented. And we're feeling like we've really hit a home run with ranked choice voting in Utah this year. I have with me Josh Daniels, the Utah County Clerk, who has been one of the leaders of elected officials being willing to implement ranked choice voting. And so when I have to leave, we'll let him come. But let me just say that in these city races, cities were able to save almost half the cost of administering elections because they avoided a primary, went directly to the time where the very most voters are there, the general election, used the instant runoffs that are a part of ranked choice voting, and really it's just worked really, really well. So we believe that it's delivered on the promise of having better elections. As we do more digging and start getting more data that comes out, we'll be able to tell exactly how voters responded. Did they have a better experience? Did they feel more empowered? Were they able to more fully express their will? But so far, it appears that that's exactly the way they feel, and we're really excited with how things went Tuesday night.
That's great to hear. Thank you, Stan. What do you see as next for ranked choice voting in Utah?
So the next thing we're going to do is have various data analytic companies working on what does all this data mean, both the quantitative data of what actually happened in the votes, and then the qualitative data of that voter experience and how people felt about it. It's so important to have good elections in our form of government where we have a representative form of government. And those elections matter so much that we want voters to have the very best experience possible. And if a voter is able to more fully express their will, we should be receptive to that as a country, let alone as a city in Utah. So anyway, we're very bullish on what happened. As these companies start analyzing what has taken place and start delivering their results, we're going to take that results to our state legislature, and we're going to have conversations about how to use ranked choice voting in partisan elections in the future. So we're really excited for that opportunity as well.
Thank you, Stan, and congrats to you and your team for all of the work that you put into making this happen. I'd also like to ask Josh what your experience. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Stan.
No, I was just going to say, this airplane that I'm on, I'm to the city to run a marathon this Sunday, but I think I'm more excited about ranked choice voting than I am even about running the marathon. So I mean, really, we are so excited in Utah. So yeah, I turn it over to Josh. I think we're about ready to leave on this airplane. If you have any questions, please give them to Josh. He's actually much smarter than I am, so he'll give you better answers. But anyway, it's just, thank you for inviting me to be here. And yeah, we're bullish on ranked choice voting. Thanks again.
Thanks, Stan. And so Josh, could you tell us about your experience working on the election administration side? You're in Utah County, which had a number of cities opt into this pilot program. So tell us what that was like.
Yeah, thanks, Deb. Well, so it's our second year, which is great. We feel a little bit like veterans maybe. In 2019 in Utah, 2 cities, 2 of them in our county opted to use ranked choice voting, and we did those elections. The next time around now in 2021, we've had quite a few more cities now opt in for ranked choice voting. You know, one of the big things for us in Utah is the way our municipal elections work is there are 2 rounds of elections, so to speak. There's a primary, it's not a partisan race, but there's basically a primary that winnows the field. And then there's a general election with, you know, a discrete number of candidates that are, you know, for each open spot. So the big thing for us was not having to run those elections in the middle of the year. Those cities were able to sort of save the cost of those elections and not worry about having a municipal election in the middle of the summer when most people are more worried about their vacation than they are which unknown person is running for city council. So I think it made more sense for those communities to sort of have one election season in the fall. So that was a big difference there. And that was, you know, it saved time and money in that respect from an administration standpoint. The other thing is with our ranked choice voting is that, you know, nothing was really different. Everything was the same. We're a vote by mail state. Voters got ballots in the mail the same way they do. So, you know, from an administration perspective, ranked choice voting didn't create many differences. There's, you know, one step or two at the very end when we run our data file through the automated tabulation process to do the ranked choice process. But other than that, the administration of the election kind of looked the same. One interesting, unique thing that we were able to do this year is we have been also piloting some new technology for how we deliver ballots and how voters are able to mark their ballots and return ballots to us. So while we do vote by mail, which is a paper ballot sent to you in the mail, some voters are able to opt to receive a digital ballot. Particularly those that live overseas or that qualify under the UOCAVA laws. But also in Utah, anybody with a disability may opt to utilize options available to UOCAVA voters, which includes these digital ballot platforms. So in Utah County, we used both the Democracy Live platform, which delivers a ballot digitally in a web browser, used, you know, with security. and also the Votes platform, which delivers the ballot digitally to a mobile app. And we had many voters opt in to receive their ballot that way. And in the case of ranked choice voting, the strength there is that when a voter is able to mark the ballot using one of those digital platforms, it ensures that the voter doesn't commit some common errors that might happen with a paper ballot, like undervoting or overvoting. Like if you were to mark two names as your first choice, which would be invalid, or if you were to not rank all the candidates and maybe not realize that you had failed to do that, and that wasn't intentional on your part. With the digital systems, it just ensures that a little more accurate marking of the ballot on the part of the voter. And so that was a nice feature, and we had a number of voters opt to use that. So just a lot of good things. In terms of feedback from voters, we haven't gotten any particular negative feedback. There are those in the community who are, quote, anti-ranked choice voting. So they're always sharing their opinions. But the broader group of voters didn't have a strong opinion against ranked choice voting. Many of them liked it because they could express a more thorough preference. In city council in particular, it's hard, because it's not partisan. You don't have the same level of political tribalism where people are for so-and-so and against so-and-so. It's really more like, hey, I know so-and-so and I like this other candidate, but I also like this other candidate. And so voters were able to have a little more complex preference and sort of rank ordering in their mind who they preferred. And if they couldn't have their first choice, well, then they had a second choice. And voters really enjoy that experience because they'll be drawn to a variety of candidates for different reasons. And sometimes it can be hard for them to narrow it down to just two names. Oftentimes we have in city council elections 2 or 3 spots that are available. And so voters get to choose 2 or 3 names at a minimum from a big pool. And so I think that was also helpful, and voters appreciated that. One interesting feature that I noticed, or behavior, and I don't know if it was intentional, but one of the cities that had a lot of candidates and had 2 spots open, the voters in that particular city seemed to vote later than voters in other cities. And what I think may have been happening is because there were so many choices, voters were taking those choices seriously. And because they could rank preference more candidates, they spent more time trying to determine, who they preferred and in what order they preferred them. And so it seemed to me like in that particular city, voters turned their ballots in a little bit later, kind of right up into the deadline, which, maybe I would have loved for them to send their ballots in sooner. We would have the results sooner. But I would also rather voters, think deeply about their choices and vote in an intentional way. And I think having more choices causes them to do that. It'll be interesting to see in polling and discussions after the election if that was really something that was happening. I know a couple examples of people I know in that community that was what was happening. They were like, well, there's so many names. I have to do my research. I really, I know these 2 people, but I want to read about the other candidates. I think that's a great thing for democracy. I think we need voters actually being more thoughtful and intentional and doing their research, and not just picking a name or 2 based on kind of a political tribal affiliation, so to speak, whether that's in the partisan case or even in the nonpartisan case, there can be tribes, so to speak. So I think those were also good features.
Thanks, Josh. It's great to hear that voters are embracing this, and we're looking forward to seeing more of that data as it comes out. Appreciate your answers there. Next up, I would love to hear from our friends in Minnesota. We're joined today by Jean Massey and Carl Landskroner from FairVote Minnesota, and they can tell us more about the continued growth of RCV in their state, including a couple of new to RCV cities. So Jean, why don't you tell us about some of the highlights that you're seeing this year? Jean, I believe you're muted.
Sorry about that. I was saying thank you, Deb, and thanks for hosting this opportunity to share the experience from Minnesota and elsewhere around the country on what you describe as the fastest growing reform across America, and I agree with that. I'll just start by building on something that Josh Daniel said, and that is how voters are acclimating quickly and preferring the use of ranked choice voting At the polls on election day, one of the roles that we play at FairVote Minnesota is to span across the precincts using ranked choice voting and ask voters their opinion and their experience using it. And they tell us one thing: I love to rank my ballot. Voters have a strong preference to express their opinions in a much more powerful way, and ranked choice voting gives voters that opportunity. So we're seeing the growth of ranked choice voting across Minnesota as we are across the country because of how much voters love this system. So we're looking forward to expansion here and continued use across the country. Let me just give a few highlights, and we're going to kind of share these highlights between me and Carl. First of all, ranked choice voting once again accelerated turnout in a pretty phenomenal way. Now, it's not the only reason we saw huge turnout. This is in the city of Minneapolis in particular. As you all know, nationally, Minneapolis became a center point of a conversation around police reform following the killing and murder of George Floyd. That created a very robust local conversation about police reform and other questions on the ballot. Indeed, we had a question on the ballot on how we might reform the police department. That ballot measure, by the way, didn't pass, but it created a very, very robust conversation. It also helped create very competitive races, both in the mayoral race as well as in the city council races. That level of deep competition inspired a conversation that could not have been inspired without ranked choice voting. It was the diversity of perspectives in every way possible. And that brought voters to the polls. It engaged them in the conversation throughout, and they turned out. We saw a record 54% turnout in the city of Minneapolis. That is 11 percentage points higher than the last cycle, which was already 10 points higher than the cycle before that. We've just seen this very large growth of turnout, in part because of the kind of competitive races that ranked choice voting is inspiring. And voters rank their ballots. And at the end of the day, we have elected officials, as Josh was saying, who are more representative, more broadly, of the voters of Minneapolis. And that's really what ranked choice voting is all about. But we didn't just have ranked choice voting in Minneapolis. Because of the kind of experience Minneapolis is having, it has grown. So we have it in use in St. Paul. Now for a decade as well. There was not a largely competitive race in the mayor's race there. So we saw the first African-American mayor reelected pretty handily in St. Paul. And we saw it used for the first time in two suburban communities, Bloomington and Minnetonka, for a second time in a suburban community, St. Louis Park. In Minnetonka, we saw a large growth in turnout compared to previous election cycles, which were always in the teens, and now we saw it nearly 30%. And that's in part because of the kind of competitive mayoral race and at-large race and council race we saw in that community. So we're seeing these races drive a very different level of voter engagement in these processes. And the outcomes are validated by those voters. I want to just turn to Carl so he can speak to the kind of diversity of the candidate pool and the outcomes that we're seeing under ranked choice voting and a couple of other highlights. Carl?
Yep, thank you, Jean, and thanks everyone else for having us. One quick point I'll add on to the turnout, I think for Minneapolis, is our turnout this year was on par with the midterm elections in 2014 and 2010. So we're seeing midterm level turnout for local races here. And it's worth noting that in both of those years, Minnesota had all our statewide offices up for elections. So that's really just a phenomenal benchmark to be at for the city. In terms of diversity for Minneapolis, this is the first time that we'll have a majority person of color city council. It's 13 council members and 7 will be people of color, 5 are not. We saw in the elections this year, 3 people of color gain seats that hadn't previously been occupied by people of color, as well as 3 women take seats that had been previously occupied by male council members. So that just shows that we're seeing when candidates of color are able to run under ranked choice voting, when women are able to run under ranked choice voting, they do really well. And some of the margins that we saw were pretty significant, that voters really, really liked that option and show some of these candidates by very significant margins. So that was really, inspiring in Minneapolis. Again, I think Gene mentioned in St. Paul, we saw our first Black mayor elected 4 years ago. And this year he gained 10 or 11 points from his margin last time, which was really, really exciting too. St. Paul only had the mayor on the ballot, so there's not a lot of down ballot races we can go by there. And it looks like Minnetonka, I'm not sure if their count has officially been completed or not, but will now have 2 Black women on their city council for the first time, which is really, really amazing. If, for people from Minnesota, knowing where that city was a couple decades ago, to now having this kind of diversity on their council is really phenomenal.
Great. Thank you so much, Gene and Carl. It's wonderful to hear that RCV continues to work well and deliver positive outcomes in the cities that have had it for years, and that it's doing well in these new cities as well. That's great news.
Hey, Deb, I might just add administratively, Josh touched upon this in Utah. We're seeing a very smooth administration of ranked choice voting elections here in Minnesota. We have for now quite a while. We have next day results in most of the communities. Bloomington elected to do a manual count of the ballots, which is being conducted today. We're hoping to see results later today or tomorrow. And the other cities use what we call the Minneapolis method, a spreadsheet method. Unlike other places, we don't have certified software yet here in Minnesota. So we use an accelerated version of using spreadsheets with the cast vote record. It all goes very smoothly. It's very transparent and very fast. And we knew all of the results by the end of the day yesterday for most of the cities.
Great, thank you. Next up, I would love to hand things over to our New Mexico allies. So we have with us Mario Jimenez, the campaign director for Common Cause New Mexico and a former election administrator. And so in New Mexico, we saw RCV elections this week in Las Cruces and Santa Fe. Mario, will you tell us what you're seeing on the ground there and how those are going?
Yeah, yes, ma'am, absolutely. Again, first, as others, wish, thanks. Also thank you for having me on to talk about this important election reform. One of the first things that I would like to highlight is something that Ms. Massey just mentioned, and that is election results. That is something that our candidates and our voters are always extremely interested in, right? We want results as soon as possible. I want to know who won. And, we saw in our 2 ranked choice voting municipalities, as we had election day throughout the entire state, but those 2 counties, which are also 2 of our largest counties in the state, were some of the first ones reporting results for our voters to see. So, I think it's very important to highlight that ranked choice voting does not slow down the results. It's not going to hamper, the results. In fact, it's administratively, it's going to come out very similar. Just we're going to see, votes being added in various ranks. But, I think things went relatively smoothly here in New Mexico. And we're continuing to see a growth of individuals in New Mexico liking ranked choice voting. This is really the second time it's been utilized. So the first go around, we had people that were skeptics. We don't want to see change. You're used to doing what you're normally doing when you show up to vote. But I think that's where education comes into play, right? As we continue to educate our voters and highlight the facts that we are actually electing somebody by a true majority, then that immediately grabs their attention and they want to hear more. And once you explain how it's as simple as, ranking your favorite food or sending somebody out to grab food for the family, and everybody gives their choices, all of a sudden, everybody finally grasps the concept of ranked choice voting and loves it. And I think that's something that's very important that we all continue to do in our work, not just leading up to an election, a few months prior, but throughout an entire calendar year leading to an election, very similar to candidates running their campaigns. We'll see a campaign kickoff 2 years before the candidate's even on the ballot. And I think that's something we need to all continue doing as well, and educating people at ranked choice voting about ranked choice voting, how it's utilized, how it's going to provide more diversity, and ultimately ensure that the person that we are going to have serving us is elected by a true majority.
Wonderful. Thanks, Mario. I'm happy to see it continue to be embraced there. This is great news. Looking forward to seeing it expand even more in New Mexico.
Yes, ma'am, that is a plan. And we are talking to additional councilors, mayors throughout the city who are expressing interest in ranked choice voting and would like to see some legislation locally as well as through our state legislative session as well.
Perfect. Looking forward to seeing more on that in the future.
Thank you.
Next up, I would love to hear from Megan. Megan Casca is with Represent Us, a national ally in the democracy reform movement. And Megan, I hear you've been out in Colorado over the past couple of days. Tell us what you're seeing on the ground there.
Yeah, so as Deb mentioned, my name is Megan Casca. I'm a campaign advisor at Represent Us. Represent Us works to bring together conservatives, progressives, and everyone in between to, do pro-democracy reform, fix our broken elections. I work for the Campaign Accelerator specifically. We work directly with campaigns on the ground, providing advice and in-kind services, and just helping out folks access information and resources that they need to work on their initiatives. So I just got back. Well, I'm actually currently in transit, so I apologize for the background noise. On my way back from Broomfield, Colorado, which is a city about 70,000 people outside of Denver. And on Tuesday, they passed a ballot measure to adopt RCV and became the 4th city in Colorado to choose ranked choice voting. It was really exciting, and it was great to be on the ground with folks, just really like seeing people's energy, working with the local campaign, which was so enthusiastic and excited on election night, especially as we kind of got like little droplets of ballots back in as the night one went on. And so that was really fun. The really interesting thing about the ranked choice ballot initiative in Broomfield was it didn't start out with bipartisan support. It was unanimously referred to the ballot by the entire city council, who really wanted to see what voters thought. And, it was enormously voted on. The turnout on that one issue was in the 40 percentile. So really, just seriously heard from the city about what they wanted to do there. And so that was really exciting. I actually, on election day, was telling the campaign that I went to go get a sandwich and listen to some woman berate the barista about why she needed to go out and vote and she needed to vote on this issue because it was so exciting. So it was a really fun time. And it was great to work alongside local partners on the ground like RCV for Colorado and Better Ballot Broomfield, which ran the measure. So along with that, I actually had a chance yesterday while I was still in Colorado to go up to Fort Collins, which is working on passing their own measure in 2022. So it looks like more and more going on in Colorado, and was really loved the chance to work on the ground with folks.
That's great news. Thanks, Megan, and congratulations to all of our allies who worked on the Broomfield campaign and all of the other 4 winning campaigns between Election Day and the ones earlier in the year. It is great to see this movement, and we expect more to come. And so at this point, we would love to open it up to questions for folks who are on this call, for the panelists or for me. I saw one come in so far. This is a question about Michigan. David asks, is there a campaign to get state approval in Michigan so that Ann Arbor can institute RCV, and what's the status there? And that's a great question. Ann Arbor voters demonstrated at an almost 2-to-1 margin that they want RCV in Ann Arbor. And so there is definitely interest in Michigan to ensure that, the state can help ensure that as many voters as possible have access to RCV. And so our partners in Michigan are looking into this, and there is an active campaign going on to get clarification from the state on whether RCV can be implemented. There has been a tentative legal opinion that maybe it's an interpretation of state law and maybe could go forward, but the local folks in Michigan are working hard on this, and they'll be the ones to have the best answers. And we can definitely put you in touch with our Michigan-based partners to hear their local strategy. Other questions? Well, seeing no other questions, we can cut this call short here. But anyone on this call, you do have the contact information for FairVote, and we'll be happy to put you in touch with any of these other partners and answer any questions you may have about the RCV elections this year, the success we've seen, and where the movement is going next. So thank you for your time today. Thank you for our allies who showed up as panelists for this call. We appreciate your time. And please, anyone on this call, feel free to reach out to us with any follow-up questions. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Deb. Thanks, everybody. Bye.